I put myself in the shoes of when I was a teenager and I came here and I genuinely did not know what the heck I was doing. And I didn't have anybody to go to ask. And I feel like if I were to have access to the information that you all are putting out today when I was trying to apply for jobs or internships or whatever, that would have meant the world to me.
Profits have hit a record high, and you've all worked overtime to make it happen. So it's time to be rewarded with a corporate pizza party. The podcast taking you inside the highs and lows of corporate America, hosted by Dan Space, Farah Shargi, and Mike Petito. We couldn't afford bonuses this year, but sit back and enjoy the next best thing.
Welcome back, everybody, to another corporate pizza party. We are very excited to be joined by a guest that is near and dear to all of our hearts today, and to tell you some big announcements and more career changes for all of us, and just see what we get into from here. We're going to talk a lot, I think, about career pivoting, and well, if you listen to us, you know we don't know what we're going to talk about, so we'll figure it out when we get there. That all said, I would like to go around the table, right? I'm going to start with our guest, Eddiana Rosen. We're excited for her to be here. Eddiana, woo! Tell us about yourself.
Hi. Well, thank you so much for having me. This is like a dream come true to be here and recording this podcast. My name is Eddiana Rosen. I am an employee relations specialist at a global company. And prior to that, I was a recruiter for over 9 years in many different industries. And that is how I started the journey of just posting online, because very similarly to Dan, I saw tons of misinformation being posted around the pandemic time. And I'm like, wait a minute, this information can be really harmful for people who are actually looking for jobs. And I decided to just start posting videos. I love being in front of the camera, although like I'm really introverted. So I thought that was really strange that I love to just talk to the camera and post stuff online. And it just took off from there. People started asking questions and being curious about why I wanted to post stuff. So here I am, just rambling on to tell you why I love to talk about career stuff, but I'm very excited to be here and to continue to connect with your audience as well. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we are excited you're here. I think it's funny how many people in this field will all call themselves introverted, which is maybe we're just all very comfortable in front of like a phone and a webcam, and it changes when we get in front of people. Eddiana, you are also the first person who ever let me on a podcast. I don't know if you know this. You probably knew this when it first happened. I was a guest on your podcast, Careers in Review, back in May. It would be in May, and it was the first ever podcast I was ever on, and I did it through my AirPods, and it sounded terrible, and like I was calling in, and I'm very excited to have you here now as well. Farah, tell us about yourself.
Hello, everybody. I'm Farah Shargi, a tech recruiter and career coach based in San Francisco, and y'all, I went to Sonoma this weekend. It's a long story. There was we found black mold in the house. We had to leave so we could fix it. And so we got to stay with our friends. And up in Sonoma, there is an awesome donut shop called Dirty Girl Donuts. And we literally spent $40 on donuts. And it was worth it. They make their own Pop-Tarts. Imagine a Black Forest Pop-Tart where it's all like chocolate, like on the outside, but like delicious, not that processed gross stuff. And then the inside is just this like delectable, delicious cherries from Sonoma County, like local fresh. Oh my God, so good. If you're in Sonoma County, you got to try Dirty Girl Donuts. Hands down, best donuts I've ever had.
Yum.
We are open to sponsorship. As I say every time this comes up. Also, I don't like this Pop-Tart slander because they are delicious on their own.
Yeah, what the hell was that about?
I mean, no, but like if you've ever had there's a restaurant in San Francisco that also does Pop-Tarts like for brunch, like a fancy Pop-Tart. They're crazy, but they had this donut, you guys, that was this like raspberry cream cheesecake filling. Oh, there was like fresh raspberries and the icing on top. Oh my God, it's so good. I'll send you photos later.
I'm so glad I'm on a diet. I can't wait for my grapefruit after this episode. Thanks.
I'm just so excited to have donut stories again. It's been a few weeks. I take my kids for donuts every Sunday now after swim lessons. It became a way we bribed them the very first week, and now it's just expected. And my kids are turning bougie. They no longer will go to Dunkin' Donuts. We took them to this fancier place, Duck Donuts, once. And now my kid flips out leaving swimming if we're not going to Duck Donuts. So I've created a monster.
Oh my God. I love Dunkin'. I'm not impartial to a good Dunkin' run. I mean,
I will get you on the phone next time he is screaming about not going to Dunkin' Donuts, and you can handle that situation. in the middle of the swim lesson parking lot. I want Duck Donuts. It's
Mike,
fun.
you just 911 text me and I'm on the phone with your kids. Not a problem.
Absolutely.
Happy to help.
Dan, tell us about yourself.
Hello, my name is Daniel Space. I am an HR business partner, and I worked for companies like Spotify, Electronic Arts, and I gained a little bit of notoriety with the Dan from HR account that I then lost last year. And I'm very much thoroughly enjoying the fact that we apparently all color coded today with prime colors.
This is a nice palette as you look through this
Right?
square. For those who can't see, you will see because we're up on YouTube, but we do have a very nice looking screen going on. I have a new computer with a much better camera, and I just kind of keep looking at how much crisper it is than my previous cameras.
Oh, I didn't notice.
Oh, thank you.
Mike, tell us about yourself.
My name is Mike. I want to follow up on something last week. For those of you who listened last week, I had a huge career announcement for myself when I was named top golf course management voice on LinkedIn. I have more announcements. I also have been recognized by LinkedIn now as a top airline management voice, as well as what I believe might be the cream of the crop of LinkedIn badges. I, according to LinkedIn, am the top thought leadership voice. Which means all these other coaches, all these other bullshit artists, they have nothing on me, the top thought leadership voice on LinkedIn.
I think Dan's going to pass out. He's turning the same shade of burgundy as his hoodie.
I knew we were going to do this, and it starts.
You didn't know what I got this week, though. It was a little bit different. I spent this week answering questions on LinkedIn, such as how can you ensure your airline's maintenance personnel are certified? And what are the most effective ways to communicate staffing policies to pilots?
Jesus Christ, Mike.
It turns out it's not that different from like communicating policies to any other person. One of the questions that was on there was just like the article, because we made fun of how these AI articles are just like all junk. And the prompt for this article was like, what are the types of employees at an airline? And there was just like a section that said like pilots, ground crew. And I just commented and said, I don't know what this article is asking us to contribute, but yes, I suppose these are people who work for airlines. And it got like 78 likes on it.
Yes.
And that's how I earned my badge.
You're like full-time and not full-time.
Yeah. So if anyone out there is looking for thoughts on golf course management, airline management, or just general thought leadership, I am here for you. Link is in the link to my social media is in all of our show notes. That all said, this episode is not only about me as much as I wish it was. We have a special guest, Eddiana. Thank you again for being here. You have been working on so much, and I know Dan and Farah have a ton. But you know, you mentioned sort of how you got into this. But I think one thing we're really curious about, because we hear about career pivots all the time, and I think you're someone who's not only made a huge pivot, but also created a side income for yourself. This is going to be super broad, but talk us through like where did this pivot come from? How did you make it? Like, what got you to sort of make this pretty big switch, right?
Yeah, so I've been pretty fortunate where I was at a company pretty early on in my career where I was under the director of HR, and she took an interest in me to become my mentor. And although essentially I was a recruiter, I had a lot of oversight over the general HR practice. She was essentially the director, so she was wearing the hat of an HR VP mostly. So I got to see a lot of the ins and outs of what an HR investigation would look like. I got to work with the unions. I got to work with contractors and freelancers, and I got to do a lot of the onboarding piece. So it's not just doing the recruiting, but a lot of the HR general stuff that I essentially got an interest in. But as you know, doing a pivot from the title recruiter into what I do now, employee relations, is very specific. So it's not just HR, but just a piece of HR that only handles one area of the day-to-day employee things, employee lifecycle stuff. So I was able to really leverage that small piece of experience and exposure I had back then when I first started my career. And that's essentially how I was able to leverage that into my resume. Now, the reason why I made the pivot is because although I love recruiting and I enjoyed my years in recruiting, as we all know, everybody in this room, I was tired of just feeling disposable. And I know that you can feel disposable that way in every single career, but recruiting is very special because the economy goes down. Most likely recruiters are the first to go. So I took an evaluation of myself and said, I just am tired of feeling so anxious all the time of, hey, if the economy is going to go down or if this company feels like they just are at a standstill with growth, that's also going to mean that my career is also going to be at a standstill with growth. Those were the main reasons why I decided to take a quick look and a big overhaul of who I wanted to be and where I wanted to go. Now, people might ask, you could have chosen anything else, because the one big, beautiful thing about being a recruiter is that there's so many general aspects of your skills that you can translate into many other careers. For example, you're really good at relationship building. You can build trust and relationship with others, your stakeholder management. There's so many things that you can translate into even outside of HR. But the reason why I wanted to do that into an employee relations career space is because I think that although you're supposed to be an impartial party, there was a space for me to wear the hat of an advocate for the wrong things that were going on, because essentially you are somebody who's coming in to take a look at the wrong things that are going on, or just enforce policies. But not in every company, because I've seen sometimes where companies have an employee relations person or an HR VP to take a look at policies, but it's just to check the box. They essentially just want the HR VP to be there as, hey, government, I have an HR person here, so look the other way. And so the specific company that I wanted to be this role at needed to check the boxes for me and my values. Because I remember working for a company, a very small company, where it was probably one of the worst experiences I've ever had, where it was the owner, it was a private company, so they had a lot of say into what was being done. And there was a lot of injustices going around for the employees. And I knew that I would never want to make the pivot into a company like that, because I knew I was just essentially going to be a puppet, was going to be forced into making decisions that I was not going to be able to sleep at night. And so I knew that I wanted to make the pivot in a company that was big enough, that had the structure and that had the checks and balances, where I knew I was going to feel better about the decisions that I was going to be making as the impartial party, looking into all of the facts to make sure that I was essentially evaluating and feeling good about myself by telling the employee or the manager, hey, we've looked at the facts, here are the findings, and here's the reason why we believe that the right thing was done.
Awesome. So I have to say, you went from when we look about job families and we talk about especially disciplines in HR and adjacencies, recruiting and employee relations are basically polar opposites. Because you're going from very friendly, outgoing salespeople, and the nature of your conversations are usually very positive, except when you're rejecting candidates. But it's essentially like an attraction to employee relations, which is very, very internal, very secluded, very private, and in some cases, very, very unpleasant. How have you found that transition so far?
Very tough, especially for... So I'll be a little vulnerable here. And there was another altruistic reason for me to go into this role and self-development area for myself. I'm someone who's a recovering people pleaser. And that has a lot to do with the way that I was raised. And I knew that I wanted to get better at having tough conversations, establishing boundaries, and being more confident. And all of those things have a lot to do with skills needed for this role, for employee relations. I cannot be a people pleaser because I have to tell people things they don't want to hear. I essentially need to be confident in the things I am saying because I'm working with leadership. I'm having conversations with very high level people in the organization. So they need to be comfortable with the fact that they're working with a competent person. And the way that they can feel that way is because I'm confident in the way that I am delivering that message.
That is so fantastic. I'm so happy for you. Congratulations on that. And if you don't mind, I'm going to give you some old fogey advice. As an HR business partner, employee relations was part of my role in many of my roles. And then it became a non-starter if I had to do it in my roles because of the trauma. And it is a very, very real thing for HR people to kind of almost absorb a little bit of the trauma that we have to hear, especially for the more difficult ones. And there was one at Spotify that killed me. Where I still feel really traumatized by it. And so what I always tell people, especially if they're newer in employee relations, is you have to take that part very seriously and really establish yourself and your boundaries and your feelings and process that, because it is not a job for everyone.
I agree 100%. And I think that's something else. And before we hit record, I think I mentioned, self-awareness is a huge thing as well for this role, where you need to be very much aware of your own feelings, your own biases as well, when you walk into evaluating certain things of the role, and also have grace with yourself and understand that there's times you're human as well. Like, you're being faced with certain situations where they're really tough to manage. They're really tough to look at, and know when to ask for help. And that was another reason why I knew that if I was going to go into a role like this, it needed to be in a big organization where I had those, guardrails, where I was going to have that support system, because it can be a very isolating role. And I think any role in HR, right? As we know, and we have very much aware in social media, people hate us. And regardless of our intentions and regardless of why we have gotten into this area of work, people do not believe the reasons why we have gotten into this world. And regardless of your background and career, there's incompetent people in every single career, right? I'm not taking that away from HR folks. And I do believe that there's people who have had bad experiences with HR folks. I have had bad experiences with other HR people, because newsflash, HR people do have HR folks who represent them as well, just in case the listeners didn't know that. I grew out of the recruiting piece after 9 years of doing it. And there's still aspects of it that I miss, but in this new role, I have just made a year last month in this role, and there's still so much that I want to learn and educate myself on. But again, it all revolves around that self-awareness piece that, yes, it can be very draining for yourself, but hey, therapy helps. I enrolled myself in therapy immediately because I knew I was going to need that to talk to someone and to understand that it is a tough job. But at the end of the day, you are also helping people at the same time by being that impartial party that's listening to what it is that they're going through in that moment.
So Eddiana, I love that you you called it out, right? Like we all work in functions of HR, and we get a lot of grief for working in HR. So, you've been in recruiting for several years, for 9 years. You then pivoted to employee relations. What would you love for people to know and understand about, what have you learned in your current job that you wish people knew, so that way they don't have to come see you? Hopefully there are things that they can do on the front end of work that, doesn't get them into a position where they have to deal with HR. What can people do to protect themselves?
Of course. I think what comes to mind is learning to have conversations to seek to understand. I think that a lot of people, if we can learn early on in our careers, and it comes from somebody like me, that I came to this country a teenager. I'm the first one in my family that is in corporate America. So I didn't really have anybody to guide me through politics. Corporate America is just full of politics, how to navigate relationships and tough conversations. And I think that when you come into a relationship building aspect, whether it's with your manager or colleagues, seeking to understand is always going to be the way to go, and always making you be the bigger person. I think in this day and age, listen, I've sometimes been in situations like, I want to be the drama. I want to be the petty one. I want to be the one you know what? I'm going to ask this. And I know it's going to come across as very combative, and I'm just going to do it. But I think sometimes taking a step back and realizing how that might land to the other person, it could be helpful. And also providing as much context as possible as to why you're asking certain things or why you're making certain comments can eliminate a lot of the assumptions that both parties can be making. And that can still essentially, if you do have a bad manager that lacks emotional intelligence, it does not matter how much context you provide. It does not matter how much information you give or how mature you are. They're still going to take it the wrong way. But at least you know that you've taken the right steps to be the mature person in the conversation. And if you happen to be to take yourself into the situation to have to go to HR, at least you know that you have the documentation and facts to say, hey, this is how I presented myself. This is how I conducted myself, and it still landed us here. Can you help me understand and navigate the situation, because I don't know what else to do? Because that way you don't become to appear to be the unhinged one.
I love that answer.
Mike, do you have anything to add? Like, I know that I'm the guest here, but oh my goodness, I have not heard a peep out of you since we started.
I've been very quiet since I had to stop talking about myself. Isn't that just like the ultimate?
That is not what I said.
Recruiter and content way. No, so I do apologize. I'm very sleepy. I was away for a week.
Did I make you sleepy?
In Miami. Yes, your story talking about HR is just my least favorite thing. And I started this podcast because I was just looking for a way to kind of induce a nap for myself one time a week. I love listening to your story, and thank you for calling me out. Sometimes I sit and I listen, believe it or not, despite how much I love to talk. I think it's so interesting, right? And I think hearing so much about like where this difference comes in matters a ton. And I think the one thing we can sort of agree on, and we all talk about this a ton, right, is you have been put into a position where you're in a position in a world that people naturally mistrust us or don't trust us. And, you know, your role is set up to kind of build that trust. And I know you sort of touched on it, but I mean, like, what do you say to someone who says like, I don't want to tell you this story because I know it's going to hurt me. I don't want to talk to you because you're going to turn around, because you can't say ultimately, right, you're not there to help the company, because that is where all these roles come in. And all of us know that ultimately, you know, it's like, how do you balance that? What do you say to someone who like doesn't want to handle that side with you?
That's a great question. You know, and the situation usually varies, but it is my job to establish that trust with the person and to be understanding as to where they might be coming from and where that fear might be coming from. Is trying to put myself in that perspective and not to try to force them. I said, you know, I'm here to try to listen and to try to understand. And the questions that I'm asking is to try to get perspective. So if you're uncomfortable sharing, I totally understand. But I will be essentially unable to look into the matter unless I get the information that I need at this time. Because essentially, you know, unable to provide me the details or facts or information, like my hands will be tied. But also trying to understand that the person has potentially legitimate fears to share because of potential different experiences they've had in the past. That's not for me to try to uncover or to try to, I guess, debate that you're wrong for feeling that way, or I'm not the same person, you experienced that in the past. Because there's something else that people need to understand, that at the end of the day, we're not here to judge. We're here to be an impartial party to try to evaluate the facts. And I think that's what a lot of untrained HR folks get wrong sometimes in smaller companies where they don't really have the right background and or right training or right calibration sometimes, because they do want to enforce, well, you have to tell me, or you know, it's supposed to be this way or that way or the other, because they might lack the empathy to try to put themselves in the situation of that person. That's what I would say if I were to be in the shoes of the person trying to come forward.
So, quick topic change, if I may. I saw that you are reaching 200,000 on your socials. That is absolutely phenomenal. Huge congratulations. I was checking that
Thank
out.
you.
What? Tell us a little bit about that. What content are you making? What do you like? Where are you focusing on? How are you juggling this with your full time job and whatnot? But absolutely crazy. I'm loving seeing your success.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so I concentrate a lot of my topics on job search, specifically on prep for interviews, salary negotiation, and as you know, Dan, that's a very controversial topic.
You think?
Um, resume prep, what recruiters want to see, conversations with the hiring manager, things like that. And I think that people have, and one that really went viral for me was how important it is to not feel petty or discouraged when you have made it to the very end of the interview session. And let's say that you're like one of the last two candidates and you've had a good experience with everybody that you've spoken with, and how sometimes it can be good to say, hey, thank you for letting me know. I know that I was not the right candidate at this time, but I would be interested in continuing to be considered for the future. And then people in the comments were like, I'm not begging anyone. It's their loss. I would just send an email like F you and all these crazy things. And I gave my own anecdotal experience and other people that I've helped that when you send messages like that, that's how you build network and relationships. And I've gotten phone calls myself where I jump into the front of the line because they've already met me. They know who I am. They know my background. They said, hey, we're about to post XYZ role. Before we post it, do you have any interest? So that they can have my resume be top of the pile. But people don't believe me. They don't think that things like that happen. But they decide to be the drama and just send a rude email. And that actually went super viral for me because people didn't agree with it. They thought that they call me a bootlicker. And
welcome to the club.
We get that a lot.
Yeah, we do. We do.
Yeah, it was crazy the amount of crazy names people called me. And unfortunately, I was chasing my 2-year-old around when I was posting that, and I misspelled a word or something, and people were like, I can't take you seriously because you don't know how to spell, and like all these crazy things. I was like, you know what? Like, this is just a template. It's your job to revise it before you send it. Like,
you know what? These are the same people who are listening to the untrained TikTokers who've never worked a day in corporate or never in HR, who are telling them to do other things to get jobs. But I do have something. So here's a good teachable moment, Eddiana, to support your point. I have received nasty grams from candidates who didn't get final offers. Like, let's say they were number 2. And I've called them, I've had the conversation over the phone, said, you know what, I'm so sorry, like this is what happened, we'll keep you in mind. And they email me the drama. What candidates don't realize is that if this is a company that uses an applicant tracking system, most likely the applicant tracking system is keeping a running trail of all of the communications. So let's say you apply for another job. Guess what's going to pop up? That last email that you sent, and the recruiter's going to see that. So go be the drama. See how that works out for you in your career. I'm just saying. Knock yourself out.
I do think it's funny how rejection sometimes works. And I am so dramatic, as I'm sure would surprise none of you, that I apply to jobs I have no interest in taking just to show people like the things that I'm doing. Like, I'll either do like a first round interview or I do like applications. And when I get denied, I'm still like, how dare you? I was denied for a director of product management for a large tech company today. And I was like, you have no idea what you've lost. And I'm like, you were never going to take the role. Why are you so bothered by this? So I kind of like, I definitely don't agree with any sort of nastygram, but the issue of rejection is really sort of fascinating, especially when you were that close.
Yeah, rejection sucks. It's hard to not get the job. And we talk about this all the time, especially when you get to the final 2 or 3, that like you can do nothing wrong and not get it in that situation. And I think everyone's been, it feels lame to say, but heartbroken in those situations where you go through a really long process and you start to really like this team and envision working there. And there's 3 people and they can only hire 1, and everyone's super qualified and it can be really tough. And I just think that like, or you give advice like that and the response you get back was like, I'm not begging, I'm not doing this. And I just think it's funny sometimes the reaction people have to like getting any advice like that, right? That's like all being told to beg or jump through a hoop. It's like, no, that's being a human. Like it's no different than if you're in a relationship and, you have an amicable breakup you have the option to say like, well, fuck you, I hated this relationship anyway, and like walk away. And sometimes that's what you do. Or sometimes just like, hey, best of luck in the future. And like the way you walk away from the situations, I think sort of says a lot. And by saying best of luck in the future, I hope you're doing well, you're not begging them to come back. You're not licking their boots, right? You're just like being a person. And I think this job search and everything being online the way it is has really sort of just like taken some of that humanity out of people. And we definitely see it in the comments a lot.
Yeah. And then to close off, my social media stuff, I noticed that, I took that from Amy actually on the last episode of just managing your energy, because the bigger you get, of course, the more exposure you're going to receive, and which is a blessing. I try to see the glass half full all the time. But sometimes, whether you want to admit it or not, there's messages that do affect you, because essentially you are in this space, not for the cloud and not for the monetary gain, but also because you do want to help people. There's a lot of people that I put myself in the shoes of when I was a teenager and I came here and I genuinely did not know what the heck I was doing. And I didn't have anybody to go to ask. And I feel like if I were to have access to the information that you all are putting out today when I was trying to apply for jobs or internships or whatever, that would have meant the world to me. I was like, wow, this is so helpful. And I wouldn't have known to vet certain things because I barely spoke English. I didn't know what having credentials were. And so that's the intentions that I have when I put content out there. And so it does hurt a little bit when people are just trying to mutter the waters a little bit with your reputation and your intentions about the content. But Amy said something really important last episode about just managing your energy. And right now I'm just completely ignoring those comments. I used to just like respond to try to make them understand, but those people do not understand. They don't have the capacity to do so, because if you're going to just post something so mean and unempathetic to someone, to a stranger online, you just lack the brain cells to really try to understand.
We have an undeveloped frontal lobe. That's like,
yes. So that's what I've tried to do. And I think that that's the one thing that I'll close out with is if you do have the idea to try to start and are afraid of the hate or the judgment, that's the one thing that I will tell you is try to manage your energy, as Amy would say, and do it for the right reasons and have a why behind why you're doing it, because it is easy to try to give up if you don't have the real reason behind why you're showing up online.
I have tried to get much better at just sort of blocking and not arguing. And there's something I used to argue with everyone. I was like, I can convince them, or I can be funnier than them because I think I'm funnier than everyone. But it doesn't work. And it gets you, and as much as you can just say, like, ignore it, like user 7864321, like I do see what you say, and it does get you. And yeah, I have started just sort of block, and it's the only way to get rid of them. And we had one of them popped up on our podcast page and commented, and even said like, "There's the butthurt HR person who blocked me because I was so right." And I was just like, I don't even remember who you are, and I'm probably happier that way. Congratulations on still thinking about me.
Yeah.
But yeah, you cannot engage with them. I could spend a long time. I think we all could have just talking through the things people have said to us and done when you put yourself out there. But I really loved, I think, as like a wrap up of it, what you said, that like almost nobody who makes job search content got into it for money. No one would have ever thought when I started making a TikTok video, almost a year ago, that like this would turn into money or things that could kind of come from it. I think there's some content creators who that's why they get into it, and it tends to be more on the fashion side or beauty side or something like that. But I don't think any job search content creator was ever like, this is the key to finally enriching my life and bringing everything that I need. And I think it sort of happens with the right people, that you kind of have that. And yeah, like you said, you're ultimately there to help by doing it. It's why it's there. None of us created this job market or the idea of capitalism, right? We're here to sort of like try and answer some questions about it.
Agreed.
Okay. This was awesome. This is a lot to unpack and a lot to talk about. We kind of go through a lot of this stuff. We always need to go through and make sure that everybody's okay with how this episode went, right? It's time to close the deal and make sure we get this job. Dan, you've been talking a lot about this online, in fact, recently. Any hesitations about this episode, Dan?
I just wish that we had done like an hour because I am loving this conversation. I could talk about employee relations and trolls and Farrah's donuts and Eddiana being so amazing all the time. So that is my only
There's
hesitation.
no reason there cannot be a part 2.
Yes, that is true.
So Dan's hesitations, we're going to add an extra step to this process.
Yes.
Just to make it a little bit longer for everybody. Farrah, any hesitations today?
No hesitations. I'm so glad we got Eddiana on the show. I know she was like one of the first guests that I like wrote down on the list of like, we need to have her on the show. So I'm super happy you're here. And I really hope that people listen to your advice and your guidance, Eddiana, and that, well, first of all, not all HR is bad, number one. And number two, there really are things we can do to help protect ourselves as much as possible. Because some people out there really do suck. I mean, let's be honest. And we've all been there. Like, we've all had our own experiences with HR. So I hope people will empathize a little bit with what we're doing by putting content out there and where we've actually come from. How about you, Mike? Any hesitations on your end?
My only hesitation is I had to be called out for not talking enough on my own podcast. And apparently I need to go back. I got some feedback to take back and think about for the next interview. And Eddiana, other than having to call out the host of this podcast, any reservations on this being a great episode?
No reservations. One last thing that I would want to say is that people, self-awareness and empathy can go really a long way, and they don't cost anything. I feel like a lot of problems in our lives could be resolved if that's all we had present and in mind. The one hesitation is, I have beef with you, Mike. You literally said you got sleepy while I was talking about my job. So I'm a little offended.
I am very sorry. And I said I was sleepy. I did not say I got sleepy while you were talking.
Oh, that's the one correction. Okay. You see, I'm seeking to understand.
Yeah, there we go. It worked. You raised the hesitations, you got the feedback, and now it actually works. So I guess we're all wrong. And this is a great question to ask people at the end of a job interview.
Yes, we have been proven wrong.
I spent a week on a work trip and got back over the weekend, and I have 2 young kids, and you know what it is like with young kids. It was an immediate just like dive back into it. And now it's like Monday morning back to work, except in reality, it's just like, can this be my fucking weekend? And of course it cannot be. So I do apologize for implying you made me sleepy because I love having you on the podcast.
Well, I certainly hope I can come back. We'd love to talk about the horrible bosses we've had. I know that you already did a podcast about that, but
we can do many more.
That's an evergreen episode that we can always go back to. Don't worry. We'll bring it back for that one.
Absolutely.
I got a LinkedIn message from somebody, by the way, who I used to work with years and years ago, who was just like, I discovered your podcast and I feel like I know who you're talking about. And I was just like, I will not confirm or deny a thing. Thank you for listening to the podcast.
I love that.
But you are correct if you're still out there listening. All right, everybody. That. I appreciate Eddiana. Thank you for coming again. Thank you for listening. We will put all of your socials and where to find you in the show notes. I don't know who reads show notes, but I put everything in there and nobody ever comments on them. But they will be in the show notes of where to find Eddiana. And we will talk to y'all soon for the next pizza party. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, loves.